My name is Seraphina Vale. I was 24 when I learned that silence can be a kind of mercy, and that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is disappear for a while. I remember the exact texture of the airport carpet under my sandals, gray with a faint blue thread running through it, the kind of pattern designed to hide a decade of spilled coffee. I remember the weight of my suitcase, lighter than it should have been, because I had packed like a woman leaving more than a marriage behind. Just enough for 2 weeks, nothing that would tie me to a life I was starting to doubt. I blocked him at the gate. Not out of cruelty. Out of exhaustion. Daniel and I had been married 3 years. 3 years of small erosions. A cancelled anniversary here. A birthday forgotten there. My name absent from conversations about the future that he seemed to be planning without me in them. He wasn't cruel. He was worse than cruel. He was distracted. The way a man is distracted when his attention has quietly relocated somewhere else, and he hasn't bothered to tell you. I didn't know where. Not yet. I only knew the shape of the absence. My thumb hovered over his name in my contacts for a long moment before I did it. Blocked. Not deleted. I wasn't ready for that kind of finality, just blocked, the way you close a door without locking it, telling yourself you might open it again someday. The boarding announcement crackled overhead. I looked at my ticket, Lisbon, one way, return flexible, and felt something in my chest loosen for the first time in months. You look like someone starting over, the woman beside me said, not unkindly, as we shuffled toward the jet bridge. I hope so, I said. And I meant it more than I expected to. Lisbon smelled like the ocean and old stone. I rented a small apartment above a tile shop in Alfama, where the owner, an elderly woman named Fatima, watched me unpack with the patient curiosity of someone who had seen 100 women arrive alone and leave changed. Running from something? She asked in careful English. Running to something, I corrected, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. I spent the first 3 days doing nothing productive at all, walking without destination, eating alone at small tables, letting the Portuguese light fall across my hands while I sat in cafes, and did not check a phone that had nothing left on it to check. I had blocked him. There was a strange peace in that self-imposed exile. No notifications. No half-answers. No performance of a marriage that had stopped being one long before I admitted it. On the 4th day, I found a courtyard with blue and white azulejo tiles, cracked with age, depicting a woman standing at a window, looking out at a ship. I sat across from it for an hour, thinking about how many women before me had stood exactly like that, waiting, watching, wondering if the person sailing away was coming back, or if she even wanted him to. I thought of Daniel's study at home, the door he'd started closing when he took calls. I thought of the new cologne I didn't recognize on his collar one evening in March. I thought of small things, none of them proof, all of them weight. I didn't cry. That surprised me more than anything. That night I wrote in a journal I'd bought from a stall near the river, the first pages I'd filled in over a year. I am not sad, I wrote. I am awake. It was Fatima who handed me the envelope on the 7th day, forwarded through my sister, who was the only person who still had a way to reach me. Official looking. My name and the Lisbon address in my sister's handwriting on the outer wrapping, a legal return address on the inner one. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed and opened it slowly. The way you open something you already suspect will confirm what you've refused to say out loud. It was from a law office. Not divorce papers, not yet, but a notice regarding a jointly held property, a beach house neither of us had visited together in over a year. One Daniel had apparently been in the process of quietly refinancing under a new name. His new name attached to someone else's, on a document dated 4 months prior. For months, before the coldness had a name, he had already been building a life that didn't include me, brick by legal brick, while I sat across the dinner table asking if he was tired. I did not scream. I did not call my sister sobbing. I sat very still, the paper light in my hands, and felt the specific, quiet devastation of discovering that your suspicion had been generous, that the truth was worse, and had been happening for longer than you allowed yourself to imagine. Fatima found me an hour later, still sitting there. Bad news, she asked. Old news, I said. I just didn't have the paper for it before. She sat beside me without another word, and poured 2 small glasses of vinho verde, and we watched the light change on the tile of the courtyard until it turned the color of a bruise healing. I didn't go home. Not yet. Instead, I took a train to the coast, to a town called Nazar, where the waves rose taller than houses and fishermen still mended nets by hand along the shore. I stood on the cliff and watched surfers paddle into water that could kill them without malice, simply because it did not know they existed. There is a specific kind of clarity that comes from watching something enormous and indifferent. The ocean didn't care about my marriage, my discovery, my blocked contact list. It simply continued, the way it always had, the way it would long after Daniel and his new name on new documents were forgotten by everyone who currently found them interesting. I thought about revenge. I won't pretend I didn't. I thought about the version of myself who might call the woman whose name was now on our beach house and tell her everything. I thought about showing up unannounced, papers in hand, demanding an explanation in front of whoever was standing nearest to him. But I kept returning to a smaller, quieter question. What did I actually want? Not his suffering. Strangely, not even his regret, though I suspected it would come on its own, in its own season, the way regret always does for people who mistake convenience for freedom. What I wanted was simpler and harder. I wanted my name off documents I hadn't agreed to. I wanted the truth, documented and undeniable, so that no one, not him, not his lawyers, not some future version of myself doubting her own memory, could rewrite what had happened. I wanted to walk back into my life not as the woman who didn't notice, but as the woman who noticed everything and chose her moment. I flew home on a gray Tuesday, 14 days after I had blocked a man I once loved at an airport gate. My sister picked me up. She didn't ask how the trip was. She asked if I was ready. For what? I said.
He knows you know, she said.
The lawyer's office called him about the notice going to your address. He's been trying to reach you for a week. I unblocked him that night, alone in my old apartment, which I had quietly kept the lease on without telling him, 6 months earlier, in a decision I hadn't fully understood until now. The messages unspooled onto my screen all at once. Dozens of them, moving from casual to concerned to desperate. The way a man's tone changes when he realizes silence might mean something has already been decided without him. Sarah, call me. Where are you? This isn't what it looks like.
Please.
I read every one. I felt, to my own surprise, very little. Not nothing. I wasn't a stone, but a kind of settled, exhausted clarity, the emotional equivalent of a house after a storm has passed, debris visible now in daylight that had been invisible in the wind. I did not call him that night. I made tea instead, and sat by my window, and let 2 more days pass before I answered anything at all. We met at a cafe neither of us had history with, neutral ground, my sister's suggestion, and a smart one. Daniel looked older than 2 weeks should account for. Guilt does that, I think. It ages a face faster than time. I can explain, he started, and I let him, because I had promised myself I would listen once, completely, without interrupting, so that whatever came after would be built on the whole truth and not a version I'd assembled from fragments. He explained. Badly, then more honestly. There was someone there had been for nearly a year. The house had been his attempt, he said, to have something certain, while everything else felt uncertain, which was, I told him calmly, one of the more elegant ways I'd ever heard a man describe theft. I'm not asking you to forgive me, he said finally. Good, I said. Because I'm not going to. Not today, and possibly not ever. But I am going to ask you to sign the papers correcting the property record, and I'm going to ask you to do it without another 6 months of quiet maneuvering, because I have already seen exactly what you're capable of when you think no one is watching. He nodded. He didn't argue. Something in my voice, I think, told him arguing wasn't a door that was open anymore. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt, mostly, tired. The particular tiredness of a woman who has just finished doing something necessary and unglamorous, like closing an estate, or finally throwing away food that spoiled weeks ago and had simply been ignored. The following months were unremarkable in the way that healing often is. Not cinematic, not a single dramatic scene of catharsis, but a slow accumulation of small administrative honesties. Lawyers. Signatures. A property returned fully to my name, then sold, The proceeds split with a fairness that felt, if not just, at least final. I moved into a small apartment near the water, not unlike the one above the tile shop in Lisbon, and I noticed how instinctively I had recreated that geography. A window, good light, a view of something larger than my own life to look at when my own life felt too loud. Daniel tried a few times to have a longer conversation than the papers required. I let some of those conversations happen, not out of hope, but out of the same instinct that made me listen to him fully at the cafe, a desire to understand, completely, rather than to guess forever. What I learned, mostly, was unremarkable too. He hadn't been a villain in some elaborate scheme. He had been a man who found it easier to build a second life quietly than to end a first one honestly. It didn't make it forgivable. It made it, somehow, sadder, smaller than the wound it had left. I kept the journal from Lisbon on my nightstand. Some nights I still wrote in it. I am not sad, I had written on day 4. Now, months later, I added a second line beneath it, in different ink, on a different night. I am not the same, and I don't need to be. A year later, I went back to Lisbon. Alone again, but differently alone. Not fleeing anything this time, just returning to a place that had once held me while I became someone new. Fatima remembered me. She poured 2 glasses of vinho verde without asking, the way old friends do, and we sat again in the courtyard with the cracked blue tile of the woman at the window, watching the ship. "You look different," she said. "I feel like I finally answered a question I didn't know I was asking," I told her. I thought about the version of myself who had blocked a man at an airport gate, not knowing yet what she was walking away from, only knowing that she needed room to hear her own thoughts again. I thought about how that single quiet act, not dramatic, not vengeful, just necessary, had been the first domino in everything that followed. There had been no shouting, no public humiliation, no cruelty dressed up as justice. Just distance, then clarity, then truth, then the slow, unglamorous work of setting things right. I looked at the tile, the woman at the window, still watching her ship, forever caught in that moment of not yet knowing. I understood her differently now. She wasn't waiting for the ship to return. She was simply the last one to know she no longer needed it to. The light shifted across the courtyard, soft and gold, the way it does at the end of a long afternoon in a city that has seen 1,000 women arrive broken and leave whole. I finished my wine, and for the first time in a very long time, I did not think about him at all. I thought instead about tomorrow, which, for the first time in years, belonged entirely to me.